Can everyone hear us okay? I'm going to assume yes, unless there's hands raised. Thank you all for joining us this afternoon. We're here to talk about the Aquatic Resource Mitigation Fund and the 2025 grant round opportunities. As Eddie said, I'm Emily Nichols, and I'm the ARM Fund Program Manager, and I will be presenting today with my colleague, Seta Detzel, who's one of our wetland mitigation specialists. So this afternoon, we'll provide an overview of the ARM Fund program, details on the 2025 grant round, including the target projects, types, eligibility requirements, application materials, our resources, and we'll end with a question and answer session. So please ask us questions. We welcome, any projects you want to talk about, and we're really, again, appreciate you all joining us today. So the ARM Fund, for those of you who are not familiar with us, our mission ensures that funds generated through in-lieu fee mitigation payments for unavoidable impacts to aquatic resources are used to fund projects that replace, repair, and protect aquatic resources within the same watershed where authorized impacts occur. How satisfy state and/or federal mitigation requirements. As the in-lieu fee program sponsor, the mitigation responsibility to offset these losses is transferred to the ARM Fund program. All funds received are pooled by the watershed service areas and must be spent to support compensatory mitigation projects within the watersheds where these impacts occur. Our program holds and manages the funds and announces a competitive grant round annually across service areas where funds are sufficient to support restoration projects. Grant applications received are evaluated and scored in accordance with state and federal criteria. We are a state and federal program, and applications are reviewed to determine project suitability to serve as compensatory mitigation to offset impacts authorized by state and federal permit decisions. Completed ARM projects generate credits through achieving a net gain of aquatic resource area and function to offset the losses and satisfy our program's obligation to meet compensatory mitigation. Our program operates in accordance with the Aquatic Resource Compensatory Mitigation Statute, state rules, as well as the federal mitigation rules governing in-lieu fee compensatory mitigation programs. This is our in-lieu fee program instrument. It documents the guidelines, responsibilities, and standards for the use, operation, and maintenance of the ARM Fund in compliance with federal rules. We did update this in 2023, and we continue to work with our partners and constituents to make amendments to help improve and streamline our processes. Since the program was established in 2006, our funds have been used to support projects that have resulted in significant ecological accomplishments, as summarized on this slide. Historically, we've been highly successful in the preservation of aquatic resources and their buffers. However, preservation alone cannot replace lost functions, values, or acreage. To meet the goal of no net loss, our program has been redirecting focus from resource preservation to sustainable restoration activities to promote a net gain in aquatic resource areas, functions, and services at the landscape scale. Our program's success moving forward will continue to rely and build on strong partnerships that were established by previous ARM staff, our decision committees, and many of the partners and practitioners on the call today. We're hopeful that moving forward, our program will continue to solicit high-quality, impactful, sustainable aquatic resource projects that align with state and federal objectives. This slide's kind of busy, but we wanted to provide you the grant evaluation and approval process framework. Our applications are reviewed by two distinct decision bodies at the state and federal level. At the federal level, we have an interagency review team that's chaired by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers and comprised of representatives from multiple federal agencies, including the Army Corps, the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, National Marine Fisheries Service, and the Natural Resource Conservation Service. At the state level, we have our State Site Selection Committee, and it's a team of state and non-governmental conservation agencies with expertise in the field of botany, wetlands ecology, stream restoration, wildlife biology, and other restoration activities. So the interagency review team, our federal team, determines whether projects are suitable to provide federal compensatory mitigation for activities authorized by the Department of Army permits pursuant to a federal mitigation rule. So essentially, they're looking at projects to see if they can generate credit to offset federal authorizations and impacts. Our site selection committee reviews and ranks applications using evaluation criteria that's spelled out in state rule and develops funding recommendations for awarding grant projects. The funding award recommendations have to be approved by the New Hampshire Wetlands Council and supported by the IRT's initial evaluation comments. This year, we've adjusted our evaluation process a little bit. So we're incorporating credit generation potential into the eligibility screening at the pre-proposal phase. And we've also adjusted the timeline so that the interagency review team's initial evaluation comments are received prior to the state site selection committee ranking projects and developing funding recommendations. This is an effort to improve our transparency and improve communications to our applicants. Once funding award decisions are made, projects selected for funds have to enter into a grant agreement that's approved by governor and council before any funds can be dispersed. And all projects that have been approved must also have a federal mitigation plan that's approved by our interagency review team. So as you all know, we're here today to talk about the 2025 grant rounds. This year we have over $7.5 million available in funding. We are seeking to support high quality, impactful, sustainable restoration projects throughout the state. The map here summarizes the funding that's available in all of the service areas. We'll note that these amounts are subject to change as additional in lieu fee payments are received. Some of the service areas have relatively low amounts of funding, but we are advertising it in hopes that we can help support some projects and get them over the finish line and construction in the ground. So if you have any projects that need gap funding, especially in areas where, there might only be $23,000 available, like the Saco, please reach out. We're happy to discuss your proposal. This is our annual ledger. It summarizes the impacts that have paid into the fund and the resources and functions and values we're seeking to offset. So we have, I don't know if you can see my cursor, but for each service area, there's the total available funds. This includes carryover funds, as well as the impacts and resource types, loss functions that paid in over the past year. This is a great tool to reference when you're trying to determine the kind of mitigation or credit generation that's needed within the service areas. So our 2025 grant program guidance and instructions provides all of the information and details you need to know about the grant round and the pre-proposal process. It includes grant round goals, objectives, available funds, eligibility criteria, links to all of the application materials, as well as the grant timeline. So now I'm going to hand things over to Seta, who will provide an overview of this year's eligibility criteria, as well as target project types. How's it look? Looks great. And is my audio okay? Can folks hear me okay? Okay, great. Good afternoon. My name is Seta. I'll be providing an overview of the project types and eligibility criteria for ARM funding. Before I describe each category, I want to highlight 8 key criteria for developing a successful mitigation proposal that will meet state and federal requirements. Number 1, the project should support local and regional priorities for conservation, restoration, and connectivity.
Second, the project needs to meet federal and state requirements. As Emily laid out, the ARM Fund mission is to provide mitigation for losses to state and federally jurisdictional impacts. Projects should provide a net gain, an increase in aquatic resource area, acreage, and or function. Preservation is in parentheses here because it removes the threat. More on that in a moment. Project areas need to be legally protected, the project area as well as the buffers. All projects require a minimum of 5 years of performance monitoring. And project proposals and budgets need to include provisions for adaptive management and remedial measures. Restoration, typically needs some adaptive management. It can be somewhat of an art and unpredictable. So we do request that budgets include an item for adaptive management and that's anticipated and built into monitoring plans. And last, all projects that are ARM funded need to result in self-sustaining aquatic resource areas that will not require any ongoing manipulation after that initial monitoring and adaptive management period. So as you heard earlier, ARM's mission is to replace, repair, and protect aquatic resources and functions as compensatory mitigation for losses. ARM funds projects across 4 categories: restoration, enhancement, creation, and preservation. A project can fall under multiple categories and target multiple resource types. All restoration, creation, and enhancement projects will result in that net gain of aquatic resource acreage and or function. Preservation, on the other hand, is the only category that does not achieve those things. It only removes the threat to those resources. So that's an important distinction. So let's go over what activities qualify under each category and review some project examples. First category is wetland restoration and wetland enhancement. This can occur in coastal or inland systems. And once again, these activities will return that lost acreage back onto the landscape or improve functions in degraded wetland systems. So activities include removing fill that was placed in wetlands. Opportunities to do this exist, for example, in agricultural areas, gravel pits, floodplains, areas associated with dams, old roads and trails, and likely other areas as well. Reestablishing hydrologic connections to wetlands, reestablishing native vegetative cover in wetlands, barrier removal to restore degraded aquatic habitat and connectivity, creation of habitat for nesting, spawning, or nursery habitat, and coastal habitat restoration and coastal resiliency projects such as living shorelines, removing barriers for tidal exchange and marsh migration. And lastly, your ideas for projects, which we look forward to hearing about. This is the before and after at the Wagon Hill Farm Living Shoreline Project in Durham. This received ARM funding. You can see it was a large collaborative partnership among several entities, as almost all restoration projects are through ARM. The project was designed to reduce erosion and salt marsh loss through salt marsh reconstruction and tidal buffer restoration. The project resulted in roughly 300 feet of restored shoreline, 15,000 square feet of salt marsh, and tidal buffer restoration. The second category is stream restoration, stream and river restoration and enhancement. Again, this can take place in coastal or inland systems, and it can occur in the channel itself, within the banks, or in the riparian zone outside the channel. These activities will return lost stream surface area that is not on the landscape and or improve functions in degraded riverine systems. Some activities might include restoring sections of stream and river. So opportunities for this would exist where channels have been straightened, buried, armored, or impounded. Reestablishing stream hydrology to restore the natural flow regime. This can include reestablishing surface water connections as well as lateral connectivity. Reconnecting rivers to floodplains. This can look like the removal of floodplain fill, so berms within floodplains, as well as raising potentially channels that have been incised and lost that floodplain connectivity. barrier removal to restore degraded aquatic habitat and connectivity, riparian buffer restoration and enhancement. So again, here, stream restoration and enhancement doesn't need to be in the channel. Those riparian buffers are critical and have a critical nexus to the functions that the stream provides. And so those areas are eligible for funding for restoration. Enhancement with large wood additions. And lastly, projects that you bring to us, ideas we haven't thought of. This is not comprehensive by any means. This is an example of a river restoration on the Bellamy River in Dover. This was accomplished through 2 dam removals as well as targeted river restoration activities. This received funding from ARM and was a large collaborative effort. It has resulted in significant ecological improvements within the watershed. A few of the benefits of this project were restoration of river herring passage up to 1 mile, removal from EPA's 303D list of impaired waters, passive restoration of floodplain wetlands, the removal of contaminated sediment, and restoration of stream functions such as sediment transport. So on the topic of stream restoration and enhancement, a common question we receive is whether culvert upgrades are an eligible project type. In general, these are not going to compete very well because of the sustainability of the mitigation, right? Culverts have an expiration date, and as well as the limited project footprint relative to the very high cost of implementation. If you have a culvert project in mind, here are a few recommendations to boost eligibility. So for site selection, ARM encourages culvert upgrade projects to be located in areas that are state and or federal priorities for stream habitat and connectivity. The projects should have either existing conservation protections or there should be a proposed conservation mechanism. And this is to ensure that there's protection of those resources on either side of the road crossing, right? Many of these crossings will be within maintenance rights of way. So we're looking for that permanent protection on either side to kind of extend to the resource improvement and restoration in perpetuity. Ideally, culvert upgrades should be part of a larger project scope. So ARM is really trying to encourage potential applicants to look for additional restoration opportunities beyond just the culvert itself. So is there upstream or downstream channel restoration that's needed? What does the riparian area look like? Is the stream right up against an open field? Is there an opportunity for planting and enhancement of that riparian area? What are floodplain areas like? Is that connection there? What is the condition of floodplains? These are all things that could enhance a culvert upgrade proposal. For structured design, we encourage any culvert upgrades to be span structures and to be designed to be geomorphically compatible for the stream type. Here's an example of a culvert upgrade project that was funded by ARM. It involved the replacement of an undersized culvert that served as a tidal restriction and barrier for AOP. Lubberland Creek is a first-order stream that runs through a significant unfragmented forest block into Great Bay Estuary. The project was a priority for the watershed and supported connectivity to priority habitat areas in difficult-to-replace salt marsh resources. The project restored marsh migration opportunity and tidal migration and reconnected 2 miles of upstream wetlands for diadromous fish passage. The third category is wetland creation. So ARM can fund wetland creation in freshwater or tidal systems. Creation is the establishment of a self-sustaining wetland in an upland where there were historically no wetlands. Because of that, this success can be a bit more challenging than with restoration. So it's really important to have that specialized expertise through all phases from conception to monitoring. Site selection is very important. You want to understand, ARM would want to understand the adjacent land uses. We don't want to create an island where there's no connectivity and the area isn't sustainable in the long term. So the target functions for the wetland should be well defined, as well as the target wetland type. The yeah, we haven't funded too many of these recently, but we absolutely can do more if the opportunity is out there. This is an example ARM funded a number of years ago, and this was a vernal pool creation / enhancement project. It was proposed as part of a land preservation project. This was a combined creation and preservation project. And on the left, that was the sort of construction phase of the vernal pool, and on the right was following 5 years of monitoring when breeding amphibians were actively utilizing the pool. The fourth category is preservation. So preservation is the legal and permanent protection of aquatic resources and buffers through a real estate transaction. So this would be a fee simple purchase by a municipality or a conservation entity, or conservation easements and deed restrictions, preventing future development. This category can be challenging to fund because it will compete with restoration, creation, and enhancement, which, as you know by now, are tied to our mission of, providing that net gain in resource area and acreage. Nonetheless, they are viable projects, and we have some a list of what the ideal preservation project would include, key characteristics. So preservation parcels should have ample and high functioning wetland and stream resources. We're putting out the number of 50% wetland to upland area. That is not a fixed number, but it gives you an idea that we're looking for the preservation properties that have higher aquatic resources on them are going to score higher. These parcels should provide high value for habitat, for water quality protection, and for landscape connectivity. Parcels should contain ideally what are called difficult to replace aquatic resources. And you can find more information about this definition in our guidance. But briefly, difficult to replace aquatic resources include vernal pools, bogs, salt marsh or area for salt marsh migration, sand dunes, habitat for state or federally listed wildlife species, habitat for state listed plant species or state designated exemplary natural communities, or floodplain wetlands that are connected to large order streams and rivers. Preservation projects need to have a threat of development. And finally, if the property contains aquatic resources that have been altered, there should be a willingness to pursue funding to implement restoration. Sorry, one last bullet there. One option for preservation is what we call preservation with restoration opportunities. So this requires identifying that a potential parcel has altered or degraded aquatic resources that there's restoration opportunity. So ARM could fund the land acquisition and protection, as well as a restoration feasibility study as phase 1 of the project, followed by phase 2, which would be the restoration design, permitting, and implementation. So this kind of meets the need of the critical timing for protecting land that is under a threat of development, but also keeps the door open for that restoration to occur. And here is an example of that. This is a project in New Boston, which is preservation with restoration opportunity. In 2024, ARM awarded the Piscataqua Land Conservancy funding to purchase a 294-acre parcel in fee to conduct some stream restoration on a more minor scale, but more importantly, to conduct a feasibility study for wetland and stream restoration in a former gravel pit on the property. So once the results of the feasibility study are complete, PLC is going to return to ARM and request funding to implement that restoration work as phase 2 of the project. So as a preservation project, this checks a lot of boxes. This parcel contained several difficult to replace resources. The parcel overlaps with Wildlife Action Plan Tier 1, 2, and 3 habitat. Parcel was within a regional priority for preservation, and the parcel enables the connection of 700 acres of protected land. So PLC's collaboration and willingness to identify and pursue restoration made this a competitive project. The end result will be a net increase in aquatic resource acreage, function, as well as the removal of threat of development to these very high function resources. So that concludes the overview of project types. I'll pass it back to Emily for the application overview.
Okay. Thank you, Seta. That's great. And am I sharing the right screen?
Yes.
Okay. Let me just move this for a second. All right, that was fabulous overview of the project category. So thank you. Now I'll go over some details on how to apply and submit a pre-proposal. First and foremost, we recommend you review the 2025 grant guidance and instructions. It really does kind of contain all the details about our grant round eligibility and process. Applications or pre-proposal applications must be submitted by May 31st, and they must include all of the elements that are required that are outlined on this slide. So you need to have an application form along with project narratives, a preliminary budget, maps, and the recommended supporting documentation such as photos, design plans, even if they're conceptual, letters of support from project partners or landowners. Our pre-proposals can be filed online or downloaded and emailed or snail mailed. Once online submittals are preferred, as they might save time for you. And a lot of the way that we build our electronic forms is some of the information can be pre-populated if you're invited to submit a full application. Pre-proposals must include the signature of the authorized contact, and any proposals that are late or incomplete may not be eligible for funding. So all pre-proposals, as I went over earlier, will be reviewed by the ARM Fund Site Selection Committee and the Federal Interagency Review Team to determine the potential to provide compensatory mitigation. Pre-proposals that pass the pre-eligibility screening may be contacted to schedule a site visit. Those site visits will be conducted in June. And then in early July, ARM will provide each applicant individualized feedback on your project and invite proposals consistent with our eligibility criteria and the objectives of the grant round to submit a full proposal or a full application. The full applications will be due September 5th. And so each project for pre-proposal must provide a narrative. The narratives should paint a clear picture of the project and proposed activities, including the goals, how the project will meet the objectives and compensate for losses within the watershed, include a description of the project scope and anticipated outcome, including the quantities of resources to be restored and functional improvements that are targeted. Depending on the project type, you may submit multiple kind of narratives. The application does have prompts and outline the information needed, but for a restoration, enhancement, and creation project, please do provide a description of the baseline conditions of the aquatic resources and the specific functions that will be improved by the project activities. We'll want to see how the project will result in a sustainable and measurable lift in aquatic resource acreage and or function at the landscape level, and the metrics for determining that success. So how will you measure the lift that the project will provide? Also, explain how your project areas will be protected in perpetuity. Restoration areas have to be protected so they can maintain that natural state that we're restoring. For preservation projects, make sure your narrative includes what is the threat, what are the baseline conditions that make those resources so exemplary and optimal function. If there's any difficult to replace resources, make sure you document the presence of that. Describe the proposed protection mechanism. And in those cases that Seta was talking about where restoration opportunities may occur, make sure you describe those and the willingness of the landowner as well as the steward to agree to pursue restoration activities, and comply with the limited use restrictions that are outlined in our typical conservation easement agreements. When it comes to budgeting, be cautious, be conservative. Restoration activities can be expensive. So we recommend that applicants make sure that your budgets are including all potentially eligible costs. Within the pre-proposal application, there is a template that outlines eligible costs and includes the cost for restoration as well as preservation project scopes. Make sure you're considering your project planning and design, your permitting, engineering assessments, your delineations, your surveys, construction and material, project management, your site protection mechanisms, include costs for adaptive management because things happen and you want to make sure that your budget has a cushion to support that work to make sure we're optimizing the restoration potential of these projects. We recommend contingency costs as well as financial assurances in the event and unanticipated issues are encountered. And also make sure you're including costs to monitor the projects. Our requirements, there's a minimum of 5 years monitoring following any restoration or enhancement activities, plus long-term stewardship monitoring for the protected areas. We can fund cradle to grave projects. So that means from design to monitoring, and it should be accounted for in your budget. And also phase projects are eligible. So if step 1 is to acquire land, you can submit a budget for that. And then step 2 could be the feasibility study to perform the restoration and design work on that property. So these are our eligible expenditures. I'm not going to read the slide, but it is in our guidance. So another plug to read our guidance. But, these are just some of the considerations that, of what would be eligible through funding. Project-related expenditures are eligible for reimbursement once the grant agreement is approved by Governor and Council. Again, for more information on the tasks, review our budget template, review the guidance documents, and then we also have this checklist of required documentation. So this outlines the requirements for kind of 3 phases of the project, including what's required at the pre-proposal, what's recommended at the pre-proposal stage, as well as the full proposal stage, and then the awarded project stage. So this includes, again, the required versus recommended items and, just highlights for different project categories in different stages, what your application should include and what you should budget for. When preparing your pre-proposal, we recommend using the ARM project planning tool. This was developed last year to kind of serve the pre-proposal application needs. It's a single source for a suite of data layers that are used by potential ARM applicants when researching project eligibility, developing your proposals, and producing the map products required for pre-proposal and full grant applications. I'll highlight there's multiple resource layers available, and the required maps for the pre-proposal stage include the landscape connectivity map as well as a wildlife action plan tier map, but there's plenty of other recommended documents that are in the checklist from the previous slide that really do paint that picture for our review committees of what your project will accomplish. So can't emphasize having preliminary delineations of the aquatic resource areas, as well as photos of those areas. Photos, are worth 1,000 words sometimes, and conceptual plans. So our grant round timeline, this is, I just have to move something so I can read the slide, sorry. So here we are in April. We're here at the outreach event, and we've sent out kind of our announcement for request for proposals. Pre-proposals will be due May 31st, and pre-proposal eligibility screening will occur in early June. we will contact some applicants to conduct a site visit to see, being on the ground helps our committees identify the true potential of your project. It also allows a face-to-face interaction to talk about the project. All pre-proposals will be reviewed by the site selection committee as well as our interagency review team to determine the credit potential. And those recommendations will be relayed to applicants in early July. Eligible applicants will be invited to submit a full application, and the deadline for those full applications is September 5th. After the full applications are received, we have to issue a federal public notice and coordinate an initial review with the Division of Historical Resources. We then conduct site visits with our site selection committee. Those will be in October. Initial evaluation letters are the comments from our federal review committee. Those will be provided in mid-November. And then those initial comments will be incorporated into the state site selection committee's scoring and development of funding recommendations. Our goal is to have our funding recommendations to the Wetlands Council for their December meeting. And then that way we can announce awards by the end of the year, and folks can proceed with securing the certificates of authority to accept grant funds. So this slide is an overview of the ARM grant project stages. So we just want to kind of give you a preview of what an ARM grant project really looks like. It's more than just securing a funding, and it's not you submit an application and we hand you a giant check. It's we solicit our pre-proposals. And that's the pre-proposal stage. There's the full application stage. And then if you're selected for funding, there's the securing the award. So that's the grant agreement stage. You also have to receive approval of a federal mitigation plan. And then we can implement the project and get, do the in the ground restoration that we're striving to do. And then the final stage is long-term management of the project and release of credits. So oops. Sorry. I don't know why. Okay, we're back. So this is a more detailed overview of the process. This is a resource we're working on, and we hope to publish it, prior to notifying folks of the full application process. But this really just walks through the different stages of our grant process and the different milestones that we hope to accomplish. And so with that, that's really it. Thank you for your time. I know this was a lot of information, and we will open it up to questions. If there are any.
I have a question. We have a body of water that has a number of invasive plant species on its bank. Does that fall into the scope of this program at all?
So yes, invasive species management is an eligible project cost, provided you're you need to do more than just remove the species. We want to see some sort of increased functional lift by replanting the area with native vegetation and kind of really improving the overall function of that resource area.
Are these invasive species, are they growing within the surface water, so within like a pond, or are they, I guess, what is the resource in this case?
It's a pond.
Okay, and so the invasive species, are they on the buffer, the bank, or they're growing within?
Yeah, they're on the
banks.
bank. Yeah.
Yeah, it's the devil's in the details, but I think invasive species management and restoration with native buffers, that is an eligible activity type. So
in those restoration areas will have to be protected by some sort of mechanism, be it a deed restriction, conservation easement. But we'll want to see any areas that are restored are protected and in perpetuity. And then with invasives, you need a very robust management and monitoring plan.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
We have a couple of other questions, not necessarily in order. Anna was asking what required legal protections looked like for ARM projects or buffer areas, if there's anything that can be shared about legal protections.
Sure. So those can come in different forms. Typically we see conservation easements or deed restrictions with third-party rights of enforcement to DES. I think I'm trying to think what else we've seen. It has to have some sort of mechanism for enforcement, and but we have a template that's available. It is available online. Full disclosure, we do need to update it to reflect the federal requirements. But there's fee simple acquisition provided it's by a eligible holder. So and that's defined in our rules, as well as conservation easements, deed restrictions provided there's some sort of steward and third-party rights of enforcement. I will not pretend to be a land protection expert, but luckily we have attorneys and access to them to help.
We have a couple of questions from the chat, and I promise we will get to each of them. But I also wanted to offer that Lauren Zielinski has her hand up. If you'd like to unmute.
Thanks. I have a couple questions, but I'll just pick one for now. For a lot of like the permitting of these projects, Section 106, threatened endangered species, it's helpful to work with a federal agency as like the federal nexus. Would the Army Corps act as that federal nexus?
Yes. Typically they do, unless there's another federal partner, and then they resolve that amongst themselves. But typically the Army Corps does serve as that federal coordinator.
Okay,
and
great.
those costs, and the cost to do those studies are eligible.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. This is Eddie again. Lauren, did you say you had a couple of questions?
Sure. If you want me to just rattle them off, I'm happy to do that.
While we have you unmuted.
Okay, perfect. I think in past proposals, there had been like a more formal wetlands functions and values assessment needed earlier in the process, but based on the checklist here, it looks like maybe an informal assessment is okay for the pre-proposal and full proposal. Is that correct, or can you explain a little bit more about that?
Sure. So there's, the requirements are written into rule, but it is recommended that you have the functional assessments, and that way you can demonstrate this is the current level and our project is going to bring it up to this level. You can have a preliminary one, and then if you need funds to complete that, final one and get the stamp from a certified wetland scientist, that's an option.
Yeah, I think as long as you have enough information, documentation to identify the impairments, for lack of a better word, but the degraded functions that the project is targeting, you have evidence that that's occurring and can narrate that and provide any documentation, then that's adequate. That's really the goal of having that information up front.
Okay, great, thanks. And then another follow-up on the land protection. Some of our projects that are along stream banks and stuff, they're like a section of a piece of property, and it's not a great fit for an easement, and it's a long process. And so I'm gonna check more into the deed restrictions also route and see how that works. But then I was also wondering if town-owned or municipality-owned land is protection enough, or is there needs to be something stronger when working with town-owned land?
Great question. And usually we've always put a plug in for looking for restoration opportunities on existing town-owned and protected lands. But if, if it's town-owned, it's still, the Army Corps still, our federal, the federal mitigation rule still requires some sort of long-term protection mechanism. So in most cases, there are circumstances, rivers are different sometimes, it's, a ton of landowners linearly along the stretch, and so it might not be an option. But I think if you have a good restoration project, we can talk through those details and meet with the Army Corps to see what, are willing to accept as well.
Okay,
Yeah,
great.
it's not, river projects are a little different. It's not always, I think some exceptions can be made to the preservation requirement in that case. So I think rivers case by case. And then, yeah, with municipally, town-owned land, it's a great place to start, but as long as there isn't, but something is written into a legal document that wouldn't enable the town to build a school or a public works development or some other type of development, it has to be, documented to be for conservation.
Okay, great. Last question. I know I'm hogging the office hours here. Emily, we had talked last week about, CRC, we do a lot of biostabilization projects, and you had said, strictly biostabilization is not a good fit, but kind of incorporating it into other kind of like wetland expansions or re-engaging old flood channels and some sort of habitat improvement component would be helpful. But I was also wondering, like if we can show a high enough like water quality benefit, is that included as a strong or an adequate reason or value to a project?
I think so, possibly. I
Okay.
think we'd want to know more details about the project. I think bank stabilization, bank stabilization is almost, what's the purpose? Is it to protect, infrastructure, or is it really to provide a functional lift in something like water quality or something like floodplain re-engagement? So, I don't mean to be vague, but these are each project's so different. And there's I'd say if you have a project in mind, reach out. We'll try to schedule a meeting or at least a conversation.
Okay.
And do you have so you think the water quality benefit would be measurable in this case?
Yeah, I mean, the site that I'm thinking of is releasing like 3 tons of sediment every year on average. It's like
Okay.
several hundred feet of bank that is eroding.
Yep. So just to piggyback on Emily's response, it is, I hate to be vague too, but it is a bit of a gray area. We would definitely want to talk to our federal partners. I think if it can be measured, water quality, if there's, we receive some projects that claim they're going to improve water quality, and common sense would indicate yes, they are, but there's no proposed, monitoring to show that pre and post comparison. So if there is a way to do that and you're proposing that, I think that's a step in the right direction. But with water quality, if it's the only change that's going to be measured, I would anticipate we want to hear from the Corps only because 404 are your wetland permits, right? And so that's what the no net loss requirement is for. It's for the section 404, whereas water quality, this ARM doesn't do mitigation for water quality impacts through 401. So that distinction there might make it tougher if it were just for water quality.
Okay, thank you for that. I appreciate your time.
Sure.
I do see some additional comments and questions in the chat, John and Rebecca included, but I'd like to go to Sarah's, which is kind of an open-ended question of what is the match for ARM funding? Is there anything you'd like to speak to with respect to matching funds?
So match is not required, but it is included in our scoring criteria at the state level. So projects that have 20% or more of match do receive points in the scoring criteria. However, ARM funds, our goal is to support projects that will result in a net gain of resources and functions and generate wetland credits. And those credits are prorated based on the percentage of funding that ARM provides. So in short, we can fund 100% of the project. You just won't receive the scoring points for it, but it doesn't mean it's not a good, sustainable, eligible compensatory mitigation project.
That's right. There's no real penalty for not having match other than you might not score as high at the state level.
Yeah. And, restoration is expensive, so it also depends what service area you're looking at. If we don't have sufficient funds to support the full project scope, we'll have to, we're happy to provide resources for other potential funding sources. Yep.
Thank you, guys. We have a question from Jason, which is about how many applications would you say you receive per year? And how many projects are typically selected? Please feel free to speak to the pre-app or the full app or anywhere in between.
Well, so with the shift from preservation to restoration, we've seen a decrease in the number of applications. I've only been in the program 2.5 years. So I think that the first year I came on right at the full application stage, and we had seen there was, I want to say, about a dozen projects that submitted full proposals. The majority of those were preservation. In the past few years, we've, like I said, received, there's been a decrease. However, last year, and I believe in 2023, we received about 12 pre-proposals, and 2 of those submitted full applications. And last year, we received 12 or 14 pre-proposals and 5 applications submitted full proposals. So I think it depends. We've been working really hard to help outline and define the project parameters and eligibility, and do a little more outreach on kind of what kind of projects ARM can fund to meet those state and federal requirements, because it is a different funding source than others out there. Does that answer your question, Jason?
He said,
Yes.
thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, everyone. And again, we do still have kind of our 5-minute warning at this point, so please don't be shy. You're welcome to raise your hand or put a question in the chat, and we'd love to help speak to it if it's helpful for your consideration on the ARM Fund. There were a couple of comments earlier about not being able to see the presentation. I'm sorry for the technical issue on that, and I hope that it wasn't something that affected everybody. Another question was about if we'll be sharing slides after this meeting wraps. And the short answer is yes. The long answer is if there's a specific way that's most helpful to you, we'll try to accommodate that. We do have certain publication standards that we'll just be reviewing for in order to make that possible.
And we did record this, so we will be posting a copy on our YouTube, the DES YouTube website, as well as the ARM Fund page.
I'll go ahead and put a link in the chat to the New Hampshire Department of Environmental Services YouTube. For those who may not have seen it or are thinking about taking a picture with their phone, we do have a QR code on the last slide Emily's displaying. We really do value your feedback, and we do read it and try to act on it. If you have any ideas, we'd love to hear from you.
And I think a few people on the call have reached out to talk about potential projects. Yeah, please reach out. You can email us. Our contact information's here. We have a general email as well. Go ahead, Lauren.
One more question, thank you. On the ledger, it has columns for like acres of wetland and then linear feet of shoreline. And I was just wondering, is that kind of an indicator of what type of project should be kind of proposed for those specific subwatersheds?
Yes, yeah, so ideally, to meet the goal of no net loss, we're trying to offset those impacts that paid in. So on the ledger those are just quantifying the impacts that paid in for the ledger period. So I believe this year our ledger is February to February. So previous impacts, it's not to say if you have a good project, say you have a good stream restoration project, but we only have wetland impacts advertised in the ledger, reach out. We might be able to, if it's a great restoration project, we might be able to seek approval for out of kind restoration. So, a different type of restoration from the resource that paid in.
Okay, thank you for clarifying.
Right, thanks everyone. I do not see any additional questions in the chat or any hands raised. We are coming up into our final moments here. Thank everybody who did RSVP or who joined us for this year's office hour, and encourage you, if you're at all thinking about it, to pursue some of these funding opportunities if there's a good match for a project in your particular service area or river watershed. Is there anything you guys would like to add in conclusion, Emily or Seta?
No, I'm already seeing some people leaving, but I did want to thank everyone for their time. I really hope to hear from some of you, and thank you to all of those that have already reached out, doing my best to get timely responses, as is Emily. But we look forward to hearing from you, and thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you all. And if you've reached out and we haven't responded, I'm just give me a friendly nudge. Sometimes that I need one.
All right, I'm going to hit the stop button on the recording, and if there's anything somebody wanted to ask,